Hey guys, tonight we are not going to talk about any grand battles or earth-shattering treaties. We're going to talk about hair, or, more accurately, the glorious, towering, often heavily scented, and profoundly unhygienic substitute for hair that became the defining feature of European elite society for over a century, the powdered wig, or peruke. You are standing now in the cramped, shadowed streets of 17th-century London, or perhaps Paris. The air is thick, a murky blend of wood smoke, open sewage. Yes, that smell is just always there. And if you're lucky, the faint scent of stale lavender water, meant to mask everything else. You're rubbing at your neck, feeling a familiar, tiny, maddening crawl. You scratch at the back of your head, trying to be subtle about it, but everyone around you is doing the same thing. Because, let's be honest, in this era, unless you were the Pope or perhaps a hermit living alone on a mountain top, you had lice. Personal hygiene, as we understand it, is essentially a futuristic concept here. Forget a daily shower, a full body bath might be an annual event for some, even among the wealthy, due to the sheer effort of heating enough water, not to mention the prevailing medical wisdom. A mainstream historical fact, that bathing often could actually make you sick by opening up your pores to disease, carrying miasmas. You trudge through the mud, your woolen clothes are rarely washed, and the intimate, constant contact between people in crowded rooms and shared beds means that pediculosis, the delightful medical term for a lice infestation, is practically a public health certainty, an unavoidable plague of the scalp. Imagine trying to sleep with that incessant itching, those tiny insects migrating across your dome. The only real remedy anyone has found is radical shaving your head entirely. Now, in the 16th century, men who did this might wear a small skull cap or a close-fitting hat. But it wasn't a fashion statement, it was purely practical. You're trading one misery for a slightly more tolerable one. A shaved head is easier to keep clean, easier, at least, to boil or burn the tiny eggs out of the remaining stubble. But a noble or a courtier simply can't walk around with a bald head. It's not only a sign of poor health, but also, frankly, a massive dip in personal status. This is where the wig, the peruque from the French for natural hair, slides onto the stage, a reluctant hero born out of pestilence and vanity. It starts small, a natural-looking substitute for the hair you had to sacrifice to the cleansing flame. The initial versions are not the massive, sculptural things you picture. They are simple, short, dark, and designed to look, at a glance, exactly like your own healthy hair, which, of course, you no longer possess. It's a very practical, almost humble solution to a very itchy, common problem. A wig could be regularly taken off and boiled, combed, or even baked in an oven's quirky or fringed tidbit to kill the insects without putting the wearer through the ritual of constant shaving and scraping. Imagine the relief! You could, at last, put on your head not your own scalp, but an object that, at least temporarily, wasn't crawling. You're finally able to lay your head down on the pillow without dreading the nightly migration. It's almost soothing, the weight of the thick, non-crawling hair on your head. Historians still argue whether the lice problem was the primary driver or just a major contributing factor to the wig's rise. Some suggest it was simply the changing aesthetics of the era, the desire for a more voluminous, Romanesque look. But you look around at the scratching crowd. You feel the persistent tickle on your own scalp, and you strongly suspect that necessity, the scratching, miserable, lice-driven necessity, was the mother of this particular invention. You see a gentleman adjust his cap. He's trying to pretend he's not struggling, but you see his eyes dart around nervously. He has just shaved his head and is awaiting the delivery of his first peruke. It is a sign of his resignation, a surrender to the inevitable, a quiet acceptance of the fact that the human body and the parasitic life it hosts are in a state of constant, miserable truce. And it's this truce that sets the stage for the next, much more dramatic turn of events, a turn that involves one very famous, very regal scalp, and an unexpected fashion intervention. The wig is waiting for its celebrity endorsement. It is waiting for the man who will take it from a practical solution to a shameful problem, and turn it into the ultimate symbol of power, wealth, and sophisticated courtly living. A wig is only as good as the head it covers, after all. Right now, it's just a tool. Soon, it will be a crown in itself. But first, you just need to get through tonight without scratching a hole in your skull. Oh, and here's a funny thought. You might think you're getting some peace, but the lice, being democratic little creatures, would often just move house, taking up residence in the thick, warm wool of the wig itself. It's a never-ending cycle of tiny, infuriating warfare. You think you've escaped the enemy, but you've merely given them a much nicer, pre-fluffed apartment to live in. Welcome to the 17th century. You probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you in the comments. I hope you're tucked in and warm. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The streets are still mucky, the air still thick, and the itch, well, the itch is still there, but your mind, at least, is drifting away. Heading straight for the palace gates, you walk toward the grandest palace in all of Europe, the place where trends are set and where one man's private vanity becomes every noble's public uniform. The ground beneath your feet is no longer a London slum, but the polished stone of Versailles, radiating an impossibly grand scale of wealth that barely touches the lives you've just left behind. You're approaching the center of the world as the 17th century understood it. And the man in the center of that world, the Sun King, is having a bad hair day. A very bad hair decade, actually. It's the 1670s. King Louis XIV of France is, to put it mildly, the most powerful and influential monarch in Europe. He's the arbiter of taste, the measure of all things fashionable, and every courtier from London to Vienna copies his every move. The way he holds his fork, the cut of his coat, the height of his heels. So, when the king starts to lose his abundant, dark hair prematurely, you can feel a shudder ripple through the fashion world. Baldness, for a man whose power was so intrinsically linked to his visual presence. His divine right to rule was almost an aesthetic fact, was unacceptable. It was a visible sign of weakness, of mortality, and a reminder that even kings are subject to the humiliating decay of the body. You can't have the Sun King looking like a fading moon. Louis XIV, ever the master of image management, decides not to hide his problem, but to turn it into an ultimate, undeniable statement of power. He doesn't settle for a simple, natural replacement wig. Oh, no. When you're King Louis XIV, you hire 48 full-time wigmakers, a quirky or fringe tidbit, just to maintain your personal collection. These aren't just barbers. These are artists known as barbiers, peruqueurs. Their job is to craft the ultimate hairpiece, the periwig, or the peruke, so vast and so dramatically curled that it becomes an architectural feature rather than a simple hair covering. You watch as Louis XIV, now in his 30s, appears in court wearing a massive, dark mane that cascades down his shoulders and across his chest. It's an exaggeration of health and vitality, a visual assurance that the king is still in his prime, still the vibrant center of the world. It's a propaganda piece made of horsehair and human locks. The court gasps, not in shock, but in immediate, frantic imitation. This is the mainstream historical fact that solidified the wig's status. When the king wears it, it stops being a solution to a problem and starts being a requirement for belonging. If you want to be seen, if you want to be in the king's line of sight, if you want any hope of securing a plum position or a lucrative contract, you must signal your allegiance and your status by adopting the king's style. You must wear the wig, and not just any wig. It must be big, it must be dark, initially, and it must announce your status from across the hall. The bigger the wig, the closer you are, metaphorically, to the Sun King himself. The expense is ruinous for many, but the social cost of not wearing one is far, far greater. You could literally lose your place in society just by having a tidy, natural hairstyle. It's a gentle joke on yourself, but imagine having to choose between feeding your family and buying a ridiculously oversized hairpiece made from a mixture of animal and human hair, just to keep your job. That's the kind of decision these courtiers were making daily. You might be thinking, well, if they shaved their heads, at least they got rid of the lice, right? Not exactly. As the peruke becomes a fashion item, it becomes a permanent fixture. Taking it off in public is a social transgression. It's heavy, it's hot, and it's a dark, thick fortress on your head, making it a perfect, warm habitat for new generations of lice. So, the original problem doesn't go away. It just gets moved and amplified. You still have to shave your head, but now you have a large, expensive, fashionable hat that is constantly being re-infested. Remember the initial, humble purpose of the wig. It was a hygiene measure. Now, by the late 17th century, it's become a massive, ornate, and deeply unhygienic status symbol. The irony is lost on no one, but the fashion demands it. Historians still argue whether Louis XIV's baldness was the sole catalyst, or if the wig was already on its way up the social ladder. But the timing and the dramatic scale of the Sun King's personal wig consumption are undeniable turning points. His personal vanity created an entire industry and cemented a fashion trend that would last for over 150 years. You can almost hear the soft, rhythmic snip, snip, snip of the French wigmakers working through the night, creating these sculptural artifacts of human hair and horse mane. They're not just making hair, they're manufacturing prestige, one curl at a time. The world of fashion has been fundamentally changed by a single man's receding hairline. It's a very human, very petty origin for such a grand piece of history. You remember that you are here to relax and drift off, not to scratch your head. So let's move forward, gliding past the dark, heavy curls of the 1670s into the brighter, whiter, and much more heavily scented world of the 18th century. Because the wig hasn't finished its evolution yet. It's about to get dusted. And the reason for that dusting is, again, deeply rooted in the unpleasant, unspoken realities of daily life at the time, involving disease and the desperate need to simply smell acceptable. You're walking toward a time where white isn't just a color, it's a social weapon. You've moved forward in time, slipping past the heavy velvet curtains and dense oak paneling of the late 17th century. The year is now closer to 1715, and the wig on every gentleman's head is undergoing a stunning transformation. You remember the dark, heavy, cascading locks of the Sun King's original style, a rich, deep color meant to convey youthful vitality. Well, that's out. Now, everything is becoming brighter, whiter, and much, much taller. You are entering the age of the powdered wig. As you move through the crowded salons, the air is no longer just thick with wood smoke and unmentionable odors. It's now laced with a surprisingly strong, sweet scent. You breathe it in. It's a mixture of orris root, lavender, bergamot, and a whole host of other floral and herbal powders. Every person of standing is covered in a delicate, white or off-white dust. This is the new aesthetic, and its origins are, once again, a blend of pure fashion and stark, ugly necessity. The biggest, most uncomfortable truth of the time is the constant, widespread presence of disease, particularly syphilis. By the 18th century, it's not just a private shame, it's a public, albeit hushed, reality. It's a devastating disease that progresses slowly, often leading to hair loss, unsightly skin lesions, and, crucially for our story, a host of very bad smells. Syphilis could leave you with patchy hair, a ruined scalp, and a pervasive, lingering odor that no amount of simple linen washing could truly combat. This is the grim necessity that accelerates the wig's transformation. The bigger the wig, the better it covered the physical evidence of disease. And the powder becomes absolutely essential. The mainstream historical fact here is that the white or gray powder was not originally just for decoration. It was a potent, necessary deodorizer and a disinfectant. Its thick, scented dust, often made of finely ground flour, starch, or plaster of Paris, designed to absorb the grease and the terrible stench that emanated from the wearer's unwashed hair, and, sometimes, their diseased scalp. Imagine you are a footman holding the door for a duke. As he passes, you catch a heavy cloud of his personal aroma. It's not pleasant, but then you catch the sweet, persistent counter note of the violet, scented powder. It's like an aggressive, floral air freshener battling a forgotten piece of meat. The powder is literally masking decay. It's a very practical, if deeply unsettling, function. The scent is often so heavy that you feel it settle on your tongue. The wigs themselves are now getting massive. We're moving into the realm of the full-bottomed wig, a colossal affair of tight, horizontal curls that frame the face and cascade down to the shoulders. They're no longer just perruques meant to look like hair. They are periwigs, architectural statements. And as they get bigger, they get heavier, making the shaved scalp beneath a matter of comfort, not just hygiene. You can't comfortably anchor 10 pounds of hair to a full, thick head of your own hair. The move to the white powder is also a fashion choice, a stylistic flourish borrowed from the stage. White or silver, gray, quickly becomes the color of elite status. A pristine white wig signals a few key things about you. Firstly, that you can afford the expensive powder and the time required to apply it and keep it looking immaculate. This isn't just a dusting. It's an application of powder that requires a meticulous process involving a powdering room, or at least a corner of the dressing room draped with a sheet to protect your fine silk clothes, which, remember, are also rarely washed. You have to stand there, often with a cone over your face to protect your eyes, while your servant effectively sprays you with a cloud of flowery, scented dust. It sounds silly, almost like a children's game, but it's a ritual of high society. And here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. Sometimes, when the price of flour rose significantly due to a poor harvest, the British government would briefly ban the use of grain-based powder in wigs, fearing it was taking food out of the mouths of the poor. Think about that, a law passed, because rich people were literally wearing their bread on their heads. It's a hilarious intersection of vanity and famine. The color white also subtly suggests age and wisdom, or at least the respect that comes with appearing older. By wearing a white wig, a young man of 25 could instantly command the visual authority of a man of 60. It's social fast, tracking through a bag of starch. Historians still argue whether the whiteness was meant to signify a fox's maturity, or if the color simply caught on because the most potent and best-smelling powders happened to be naturally pale. Regardless, once the trend caught, no one could turn back. You wear the white, you wear the status. As you stand in the salon, listening to the soft rustle of silk and the gentle tapping of high heels, you realize the entire social structure is literally scented. The power of smell is immense, and in a world where everything genuinely smells bad, the man who smells faintly of violets and cleanliness, even a heavily artificial cleanliness, has an instant advantage. The powdered wig is your armor against the olfactory realities of the 18th century. It's a visual display of wealth, because only the wealthy could afford the maintenance, and a subtle biological shield, because it helped mask the scent of disease and lack of bathing. You watch as a lady adjusts her fan, wafting a plume of musky scent to refresh the air. Even the women, though they haven't fully embraced the towering, masculine peruke yet, are using scented hair powders and complex arrangements of their own hair to mimic the voluminous, pale look. The desire for volume and artificial color is spreading like wildfire, a trend that began in a king's private anxiety and was amplified by public disease, culminating in a beautiful, ridiculous, and slightly nauseating cloud of scented starch covering all of polite European society. You can almost feel the powder settling on your own shoulders, a strange, cooling dust that somehow manages to feel both luxurious and slightly grim. You've settled into the rhythm of the 18th century now. The powder is no longer a novelty, it's an expectation. You can almost taste the mixture of starch and lavender on the air. But now, you notice something much more subtle and much more important than just the color. The wig is not a single style. It's a complex, unspoken social code that you, as an aspiring member of society, must learn to read instantly. The wig on a man's head tells a story about his life, his profession, and his precise rung on the vast social ladder. You're at a grand ball, a dizzying array of silk coats and rustling taffeta. You look across the room and see two gentlemen. Both are wearing white wigs, but they are dramatically different. The first man wears a towering, full, bottomed periwig with curls that spill across his shoulders and chest like a magnificent waterfall. It's an enormous, heavy, and hugely expensive piece of work. This is the wig of a high-ranking nobleman, a wealthy landed gentry, or a senior judge. It is the non-verbal equivalent of shouting, "I have inherited immense wealth, and I do not have to work for a living." It screams power and leisure. The mainstream historical fact is that the full, bottomed wig was the ultimate status symbol, often costing more than a lower-class family earned in an entire year. The second man's wig is much more restrained. His hair is pulled back, maybe into a neat queue, a braid or tail, or tucked into a small black silk bag at the nape of his neck, known as a bag wig. The curls are tight, neat, and much shorter over the ears. This is the uniform of the working professional, the merchant, the banker, the doctor, the lawyer, and even the military officer. This style is practical. It keeps the hair, or the fake hair, out of the way, allowing the wearer to work at a desk without getting powder and curls in the inkwell. It signals responsibility, industry, and a different kind of importance, the importance of the rising bourgeoisie. You instantly know this man is earning his living, not idling it away. You realize that a misstep in your wig choice could be a social disaster. If a young officer wore a massive, full-bottomed wig on the battlefield, he'd be ridiculed for his impractical vanity. If a high court judge showed up to court with a simple military braid, he would undermine the very authority he represented. It's a gentle joke on the whole system. But the sheer effort put into this silent communication is exhausting. Imagine having to worry if your hair says you're a lawyer when you're supposed to be a philosopher. And then there's the tie wig, an intermediate step where the hair is tied back with a simple black ribbon. This is for less formal occasions, for a quick trip to the coffee house, or perhaps for someone who is wealthy but wants to project an air of sophisticated understatement. It's a sliding scale of formality that shifts based on the time of day, the location, and the company you keep. You need multiple wigs for multiple occasions, a wardrobe of heads. Now look closely at the color of the ribbon on a military officer's queue. The color of the ribbon or the silk bag could sometimes signal his regiment or his political allegiance. This is a subtle, quirky or fringe tidbit. In the heated political climate of 18th-century England, a wig styled slightly differently, perhaps with a specific type of knot or a very specific shade of powder, could indicate whether you were a Whig or a Tory. The subtle variations were everything. You are wearing your politics on your head, literally. It's a secret handshake made of starch and ribbon. Historians still argue whether the peruke in its later stages became more about reflecting class rigidity or if it actually enabled a certain amount of social mobility. For example, a successful merchant could buy a more expensive, larger wig to visually claim a higher status than his birth might suggest, essentially buying his way into an appearance of nobility. Was it a cage or a ladder? It's a complex question, but in the moment, as you watch the silent judgment pass from eye to eye, you feel the rigidity of the code more than its flexibility. The wig is your social price tag. Its quality, whether it's made of expensive, real human hair, often bought from the poorer classes, or even shaved from the dead, a rather grim thought for a sleepy story, or cheaper horsehair or goat hair, is instantly apparent. The shine of the powder, the perfection of the curl, the sheer volume. It all adds up to a number that everyone in the room instinctively knows. As the music swells and the powdered dancers twirl, you absorb the unspoken language. The wig tells you who to bow lowest to, who to approach for a favor, and who to politely ignore. It is the ultimate social shorthand in a world that values appearance above almost all else. The weight on the wearer's heads is not just the weight of the hairpiece itself. It is the immense, crushing weight of social expectation. And you realize, as you let your mind drift over the powdered heads, that you're not just looking at a fashion accessory. You're looking at a deeply complex, scented, and slightly absurd system of power. You're ready to learn how these ridiculous things were actually put together. It's an almost industrial process, and the materials are surprisingly humble, often coming from very dark places. The elegant, powdered curls that define the aristocracy are a miracle of construction. And you're leaving the brightly lit salon now to visit the cramped, often dusty, but highly specialized workshop of a wigmaker or perruquier. The contrast is stark. Here, there are no silks or powdered perfumes. There are only tools, steaming pots, and the slightly metallic, animal tang of raw hair. You step into the shop. It smells faintly of sulfur, used in the treatment of the hair, and beeswax. You watch a master craftsman at work. The process of creating one of the massive, status-defining perukes is slow, painstaking, and requires a skill set that borders on engineering. This is not just a barber shop. It is a small factory dedicated to the manufacture of social prestige. The most crucial element is the hair itself. A single large, full-bottomed wig could require the hair of several different people. Where did they get it? It's a grim, quirky or fringed tidbit, but human hair was often sourced from the poorer rural regions, where young women might sell their long locks for a year's wages. A desperate but pragmatic transaction. They would also use hair scavenged from brushes and combs, or, most gruesomely, hair purchased from undertakers, shaved from the deceased before burial. The rest of the bulk was made up of cheaper alternatives. The horsehair and goat hair, you remember, curled and treated to mimic the human variety. The process begins with the caul, a simple dome-shaped netting foundation, often made of thin silk or linen, that sits on the shaved head. Onto this base, the perruquier carefully weaves the hair, strand by strand, a process called drawing the hair and wefting, which takes hundreds of hours of focused, close-up labor. You watch a craftsman using tiny, specialized hooks and needles, securing small bundles of hair to the cap, following a pattern of curls that is precisely determined by the client's requested style. It's an artisanal, almost obsessive task, and the focus required for it is profoundly calming to watch. Once the hair is attached, it must be curled. This is done by wrapping the hair around clay curlers, called pipe, clay rollers, and then boiling the entire wig in water. This is the mainstream historical fact of the wig's construction. The boiling not only sets the curl, but also helps sterilize the hair, a small act of hygiene in an otherwise unhygienic system. After the boiling, the wig is slowly dried, often in a special stove or warm room, and then the delicate work of styling and powdering begins. The cost is astronomical. A first-rate, full-bottomed periwig, made entirely of human hair, could cost a nobleman 1,000 zhaozhen to 2,000 zhaozhen in today's money, and potentially much more. This is an immense sum. And a gentleman of fashion wouldn't just have one. He would have a dozen or more, one for every occasion and level of formality. The sheer financial investment required to maintain a stylish 18th-century presence is staggering. It makes your modern concerns about a designer handbag or a pair of expensive shoes seem laughably small. You were buying an entire persona. Historians still argue whether the complexity and high cost of wig construction was an intentional barrier to entry, a way for the established elite to literally price the lower classes out of status. If the wig was this expensive, only the truly wealthy could afford the uniform of wealth, keeping the social lines neatly drawn, despite the rising economic power of the merchant class. The wigmaker's shop, therefore, is not just a place of craft. It's a gatekeeper to social acceptability. As you drift around the shop, you notice the tools, the specialized brass combs, the tiny scissors, the steaming kettle, the large wooden blocks, wig stands that look uncannily like severed heads. The work is quiet, meticulous, and focused. The only sounds are the gentle snip of the shears and the soft tap, tap of a small hammer used to secure the foundation. You find yourself hypnotized by the repetitive motion of the craftsman's hands, the sheer concentration required to turn a handful of goat hair into a symbol of a duke's power. The final step, the powdering, is also often done here before the wig is delivered. The wig is placed on its wooden block, and the specialist applies the heavily scented starch, usually using a large bellows or simply a linen bag that they tap against the wig, creating the cloud of white dust. It smells sweet and heavy, a perfume that promises cleanliness and status. You can almost feel the powder settling on your own imaginary wig, a cool, gentle dusting that seals the wig's transformation from raw material to social artifact. You have witnessed the transformation of raw necessity, the need to cover a lice-ridden scalp, into a meticulously crafted, ridiculously expensive piece of social artillery. But the story of the wig is not complete. So far, the focus has been on the men, the noblemen, the lawyers, and the generals. But what about the women? In the mid-18th century, the fashion will cross the gender divide, and when it does, it will reach heights, literally and figuratively, that make the men's styles look positively restrained. The peruke is about to become a pouffe, and the elegance you see now is about to give way to something wonderfully, hilariously excessive. You've witnessed the rise of the male periwig, its evolution from dark remedy to white, powdered status symbol. Now, as the calendar edges past the 1760s, a new, much more flamboyant era begins. The fashion has decisively crossed over, and the women of the court are no longer content with merely mimicking the men's powdered look. They are launching their own revolution, and it is a vertical one. You are entering the age of the towering feminine hairstyle, or the pouffe. The male wig, for all its size, was always structured and predictable. The women's style, however, becomes an exercise in creative, flamboyant, and often ridiculous excess. If the men's wig was a stately mansion, the women's pouffe is a gravity-defying skyscraper. You are standing in the dressing room of a wealthy Parisian lady, the ultimate arbiter of taste. Her actual hair is either shaved or cut short for hygiene and convenience. But what is built upon her head is a masterpiece of false hair, horsehair padding, wire frames, and wool batting, all to create an incredible height. This is the mainstream historical fact of the era. Hair must be vertical, a statement against the horizontal bulk of the men's wigs. The styles are not merely tall, they are narrative. The pouffe can be adorned with small ornaments, flowers, feathers, strings of pearls, and even miniature models of objects that represent the wearer's passions, recent events, or even political views. You might see a lady with a tiny replica of a ship perched in her hair to celebrate a recent naval victory, or perhaps a small garden scene with miniature fruits and birds nestled in the curls. This is the quirky or fringe tidbit of the era. The pouffe became a wearable newspaper, a three-dimensional diary of current events and personal whims. You could read a woman's entire social life just by looking at her towering hairstyle. Imagine the effort. Building one of these structures could take hours, sometimes an entire day. Once constructed, a pouffe was not meant to be taken down for days, sometimes weeks. You wore it constantly. Sleeping became a logistical challenge. Ladies were forced to sleep upright, often with their neck supported by a special wooden or wire frame, so as not to crush the elaborate structure. You can imagine the gentle joke here. Your desire for status is so intense that you are literally sacrificing a good night's sleep. The need for a towering look is more important than comfort or a horizontal slumber. And, of course, the powder. The pouffe is heavily powdered, often a mixture of white-gray or even pale blue starch, all heavily scented. The sheer amount of rancid grease and decaying food matter. If the style had to last for weeks, the hair and padding underneath would turn, was so immense that the powder and perfume were absolutely essential to keep the air around the wearer tolerable. The lice problem, remember it from the very beginning, is now amplified. These huge structures, left untouched for weeks, became perfect, warm, multi-story breeding grounds for all sorts of tiny tenants. Ladies would even carry small, elegant miniature hammers, another grim, quirky tidbit, to tap at the structure to dislodge any vermin that had taken up residence. It's a hilarious, slightly gross image that perfectly encapsulates the absurdity of the era's fashion. Historians still argue whether the pouffe was an expression of female liberation, a way for women to literally make themselves taller and more visually commanding than the men, or if it was simply a highly impractical extension of male-led vanity, keeping women preoccupied with an extremely time-consuming and expensive routine. Was it a feminist statement or an elaborate distraction? As you watch the ladies navigate doorways and carriages with immense care, you decide it's probably a bit of both, a ridiculous form of self-expression that was undeniably beautiful in its audacity. But all things must come to an end, even a tower of hair. The peak of this towering insanity coincides precisely with the greatest social upheaval in European history. The sheer expense, the time, and the obvious display of ridiculous wealth that the pouffe and the massive peruke represented made them a primary target for the revolution's scorn. The powdered wig is about to meet the rising tide of democracy. You have reached the 1780s, the twilight of the grand wig era. You remember the overwhelming height of the ladies' pouffes and the massive volume of the men's powdered periwigs. But the world outside the palace is changing drastically, and the change isn't in fashion. It's in political philosophy. The whispers of Enlightenment ideals, of reason, simplicity, and naturalism, are getting louder, and the elaborate, artificial, and hugely expensive powdered wig is standing directly in the crosshairs of this new, revolutionary wave. The slow, gentle decline of the wig begins long before the guillotine. It starts as a subtle shift in taste, a return to what is deemed natural. This is the mainstream historical fact that signals the beginning of the end. By the 1780s, the influential English Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger and his contemporaries begin to opt for smaller, simpler wigs or, even more shocking, their own natural hair, cut short and unpowdered. This new style is called the Brutus, or Tatus, cut, a nod to the noble simplicity of the Roman Republic, suggesting virtue and seriousness. This stylistic change is a profound political statement. A massive, powdered wig signifies the ancient regime, the aristocracy, and the corrupt, hierarchical system that Enlightenment thinkers were beginning to dismantle. To wear a small, unpowdered haircut, or to simply tie back one's natural hair with a simple ribbon, was to signal your alignment with the new values of meritocracy, simplicity, and anti-elitism. You are no longer wasting food flour on your head or displaying absurd, inherited wealth. You are a serious citizen. The shift is accelerated by the French Revolution starting in 1789. The powdered wig instantly becomes dangerous. It is a visible marker of the nobility, the class being targeted by the revolutionary fervor. You remember the silent social code of the wig. Well, now that code is a death sentence. Anyone seen in the streets wearing a full, powdered peruke risked being denounced and arrested. The need for safety trumps the need for style. The nobles who survived fled Europe or cut their wigs down dramatically, often adopting a simple, dark, unpowdered style known as the crop. The sheer cost of the wigs also makes them unsustainable. As the European wars of the late 18th century drained treasuries, the taxes required to maintain the opulence became unbearable. You remember the incredible price of the periwig? No new, practical government could justify such waste. The final, gentle dusting of the wig is not an abrupt change, but a slow, decades-long fade. By the early 19th century, the powdered wig has been relegated to a few very specific professions. You still see them on judges and barristers in Great Britain. A tradition that lasts right up to today, a quirky or fringed tidbit. Because the law is supposed to represent timeless, unchanging authority, the wig of the judge becomes a costume of office, no longer a mark of general fashion. You also see them, briefly, on coachmen and livery servants, but as a kind of nostalgic, slightly pathetic throwback. Historians still argue whether the Enlightenment's ideological push for naturalism simply allowed the trend to die a natural death, or if the French Revolution killed the wig by making it politically untenable. Regardless, you watch the powdered, towering artifacts recede into the history books, replaced by the simple, shorter, unpowdered looks that feel much more familiar to your modern eye. The age of powder is over. You can almost feel the gentle weight lift from the collective heads of Europe. The need to sleep upright, the constant struggle with lice, the need to stand in a powdering room, all gone. The peruke, the massive symbol of 150 years of European vanity and social structure, is quietly placed on a wooden stand for the last time. It's a moment of profound, liberating simplicity, a final, unpowdered breath. The era of the wig is over, giving way to the simple, clean lines of the Regency and Empire styles. You can finally rest your head without fear of crushing a masterpiece of human hair and horse mane. The towering, powdered landscape of the 18th century has melted away, replaced by the simpler, clean lines of the early 19th century. The revolutions have concluded. The dust, literally and figuratively, has settled, and the gentleman now wears his own hair, cut short, perhaps slightly tousled, and most certainly unpowdered. The grand, expensive, and unhygienic tradition of the periwig is finished. You're standing now in a quiet library, running your fingers over a simple, leather-bound book. The air is clean, smelling of old paper and dust motes dancing in a single shaft of sunlight. The dramatic, vertical statement of the wig has been replaced by the quiet confidence of the natural, close, cropped look. This is the mainstream historical fact of the era. The revolution and the ensuing decades permanently redefined what was considered fashionable and appropriate. Simplicity is now the ultimate sophistication. The final, gentle fade of the wig into history is marked by its retreat into the realms of ceremony and tradition. You remember that judges kept them. But even beyond the courtroom, you see them briefly on the footmen and coachmen of the remaining wealthy families. This is a subtle, quirky or fringe tidbit. The uniform of the servant often holds onto a fashion, long after the master has abandoned it. The wig, once a symbol of ultimate status, becomes a symbol of servitude. It is a nostalgic uniform, a visual echo of a bygone, more rigid age that the new, supposedly egalitarian society is trying to leave behind. But the legacy of the wig is immense. It didn't just disappear. It left an indelible mark on society's habits. For example, the very term powder room, which you still use today for a small, private washroom, originates from the 18th century rooms where gentlemen and ladies would go to have their wigs dusted and refreshed. The need for a private space to perform that highly ritualized, messy routine is still embedded in our vocabulary. The wig's influence stretches far beyond the fashion houses and into the architecture and language of the modern world. As you look back over the journey, you realize the wig's story is a perfect microcosm of 18th century life. It starts as a desperate response to a terrible, common problem, lice and syphilis. It's transformed by a single man's vanity, King Louis XIV, into an unshakable symbol of political power. It's defined by a subtle, rigid social code where every curl and every bit of ribbon conveyed your rank and profession. And it is ultimately killed by the very modern concepts of simplicity, reason, and revolution. It's a grand story that is both utterly ridiculous and deeply profound. Historians still argue whether the wig's disappearance marked a true democratization of society, or if the elite simply moved on to different, less visible, but equally effective ways of signaling their status. Perhaps through the cut of their fine, English wool suits, or the quality of their unpowdered, expertly styled hair. Did the end of the wig truly flatten the social hierarchy? It's a wonderfully gentle question to ponder as your mind begins to slow. The room is quiet now. The sound of the wind outside is a low, consistent hum, a soft, white noise. You can imagine the thousands of forgotten perukes resting quietly in museum drawers or slowly disintegrating in antique collections, their purpose fulfilled, their duty to a peculiar era finally done. Their dramatic height and powdered surfaces are no longer needed to hide the realities of an unwashed world or to proclaim the divinity of a king. The world has moved on, and a gentle calm has replaced the extravagant drama. You are safe now, and the air is clean. There are no lice, No heavy scent of powder, no need to sleep with your head propped up. You are simply you in the quiet, soft space you've created for yourself. The journey through the powdered world of the 18th century is complete. The air around you is still, and your breath is slowing, becoming deep and even. The faint sound of the soft fan or the gentle outside world is the only company you need. Feel the weight of the pillow under your head. Let your muscles relax, one by one, from your toes all the way up through your legs, your chest, and finally, your shoulders. Imagine the clean, simple lines of that 19th century hairstyle, easy and uncomplicated. No more scratching, no more heavy powder, just quiet, simple rest. The world of kings and courtiers, of lice and lavender, has receded, leaving you only with the peaceful present moment. The history is done for the night. You are safe, you are warm, and you are ready to drift off completely. The silence is deep, and the calm is yours. Let the final thoughts of the powdered, ridiculous, and wonderful age of the wig simply dissolve away.